Hey guys, tonight we wander back into a time when the world burned, cracked, and occasionally exploded in your face. You strike a match, or, well, a flint and steel, and suddenly your entire wooden home could be gone before dawn. Welcome to medieval safety, where every invention existed because someone learned the hard way not to juggle torches near curtains. You're about to smell smoke, hear creaking beams, and maybe flinch a little when I mention what passed for fire precautions. Back then, you probably won't survive this century-long insurance nightmare. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a narrow medieval street, your boots sinking into the soft mix of dirt and refuse. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, sweet, almost comforting, until you realize half the town smells like that because half the town has burned down at least once. Most medieval cities were tinderboxes waiting for a spark. Every home was timber, the roofs thatched with straw, and candles burned day and night to chase away the darkness. People didn't just fear the dark, they fought it, armed with open flame. Inside a small home, a woman tends a hearth that dominates the single-room interior. There's no chimney, just a hole punched through the roof, and the faint hope that smoke finds its way out before the family chokes. You can practically feel the grit in your throat as you breathe the sooty air. Her baby sleeps beside the wall, dangerously close to the fire, because warmth in winter matters more than safety. Historians still argue whether medieval people genuinely feared fire or simply accepted it as fate. Some towns passed ordinances requiring buckets of water or sand to hang from door frames. Others relied on night watchmen who wandered with bells, calling out, "Take care your fire and candle!" A sort of 14th century smoke alarm powered by lungs and guilt. And then there were candles. Oh, the humble candles. Savior and saboteur. Tallow ones dripped grease everywhere, beeswax burned cleaner, but cost a fortune. And both were prone to toppling over when a rat brushed past. Some clever soul invented the rushlight. Basically a strip of plant soaked in fat. Cheap, dim, and absolutely deadly if left unattended. But people did. Constantly. You imagine falling asleep beside that faint glow, comforted for a moment before waking to heat licking your feet. Entire blocks could vanish overnight. After the Great Fire of London in 2112. Yes, there was one before the famous 1666 disaster. Regulations began creeping in. Stone hearths replaced open pits, chimneys became status symbols and lifesavers, and fire hooks hung ready to tear down burning houses before the flames spread. Destruction as prevention. Some innovations were charmingly desperate. Medieval cooks started hanging cauldrons on iron cranes, swinging them away from the fire when needed. Servants carried long, handled pans to snuff embers, a kind of medieval fire extinguisher powered by muscle. And those ornate metal candle holders with wide bases, they weren't just decorative, they kept hot wax and flames off your linen tablecloth. Practical elegance born from panic. But beyond the home, the city itself began adapting. You stroll toward the town square, noticing how newer structures stand slightly apart. A few forward, thinking councils banned thatched roofs altogether within walls. In London, King John ordered stone firewalls between houses. The idea was simple: stop the domino effect. Whether anyone obeyed is another matter entirely. Meanwhile, in monasteries, those serene centers of literacy and barely controlled chaos, monks developed their own safety routines. Candle flames endangered their precious manuscripts. So they built scriptoriums with narrow, recessed alcoves where lamps sat away from parchment edges. A subtle design tweak, yet one that saved centuries of knowledge from going up in smoke. Imagine a sleepy monk knocking over a candle. Poof, no Aristotle for you. And yet, not all danger came from inside. Torches lining castle walls dropped embers onto unsuspecting guards. Lanterns carried through night markets shattered in the wind. By the late Middle Ages, glass-covered lamps started appearing. Fragile, expensive, but transformative. The first step toward the modern lantern. A bubble of protection around a flicker of light, much like we now encase our fragile digital worlds behind screens and passwords. Let's not pretend everyone followed rules, though. There were rebels. The light junkies, who lit extra torches to show off wealth. The taverns glowing defiantly bright against curfews. One rogue blacksmith in Ghent reportedly forged a metal frame that held 5 candles at once. His shop burned down a week later. Lesson learned. By night, the town slept under threat. Firefighters didn't exist, only neighbors with buckets and faith. Bells rang, shouts echoed, and everyone sprinted barefoot through the streets to form bucket lines from the nearest well. Sometimes they saved a building. Often, they didn't. The smell of wet ashes in the morning became as ordinary as bread baking. Still, people adapted. Roofs tilted sharply to shed embers. Hearthstones grew thicker, and by the 14th century, some towns even required residents to bank their fires before bed, literally cover hot coals with ash. That's where the phrase, "cover your fire," originated, a medieval version of turning off your stove. You'd think constant burning would have driven people mad, but medieval folks found dark humor in it. Better to light one candle, they joked, than curse the darkness, unless it burns your house down. There's a strange comfort in that. The human ability to normalize chaos, to build safety not from brilliance but from blunders. Every melted candle holder, every soot-stained wall, was a quiet experiment in survival. Outside, the dawn rises grey. Smoke clings low over rooftops, and the air tastes faintly of yesterday's fear. But beneath it lies progress, the instinct to learn. However slowly, fire no longer just consumed, it taught. In one corner of the town, a new structure glints faintly in the weak sun. It's made of stone, not wood. The door is iron, bound, the hearth lined with tile. On the wall hangs a small wooden plaque. Nothing fancy, just a reminder scrawled in ink. Keep watch over your light. It's a whisper from a world that had no alarms, no sprinklers, no insurance, but plenty of experience. You step closer, feeling the warmth of that truth. The medieval mind didn't seek perfection. It sought peace between danger and daily life. And as you leave that smoky little street behind, you start to notice something new. How every medieval precaution, crude as it was, survives in modern echoes. The fireproof brick, the chimney flue, the metal grate. Descendants of fear, crafted by hands that learned through pain. The story of medieval safety begins not with invention, but with instinct. The simple will to live another day, to wake up after the embers fade. And as your footsteps fade into the morning, the next hazard waits quietly by the moat, creaking in the breeze. You follow the smoke down toward the water, where a wooden bridge stretches across a sluggish moat. It groans like something alive, the sound echoing through mist, and reeds. Beneath your boots, planks flex just enough to make you question every decision that led you here. Welcome to the medieval bridge, a structure equal parts miracle and menace. You can smell damp oak, hear the faint slap of water against stone pilings, and feel the vibration of carts rolling somewhere ahead. Bridges were supposed to symbolize connection, but in the Middle Ages, they were often where connections ended. Too many of them gave way, sending travelers tumbling into cold rivers, while the rest of the town stood helpless on the banks. In early medieval Europe, bridges were mostly built of timber, cheap, plentiful, and entirely suicidal after a few wet winters. Stone bridges existed, yes, but those required masons, taxes and time, 3 things most villages didn't have at once. Wooden beams rotted from the inside, nails rusted to dust. And when one collapsed, it usually took an entire crowd with it. There's a chronicle from 1190 where 50 monks drowned because the bridge at Sate. Neots simply decided it had had enough. After that, a quiet revolution began. People started treating bridges not as art, but as machines. They added draw chains, counterweights, and balance points. Primitive engineering born from tragedy. You walk across one now, feeling how the boards rise slightly toward the middle, creating a humpback shape to help water run off. That wasn't aesthetic flair, that was survival. Of course, medieval people being medieval, they found ways to make even safety political. In many towns, bridge tolls were introduced, not just to pay for upkeep, but to discourage too many people crossing at once. Call it medieval crowd control with a hint of capitalism. Still, safety was relative. Imagine a festival day. Banners flying, drums beating, everyone pressing forward to watch a tournament or a holy procession. The weight builds. You can hear the wood groan, a deep, slow sound that sends goosebumps down your arms. Somewhere, someone laughs nervously. Then the plank beneath them cracks. Historians still argue whether certain collapses were simply accidents or the result of sabotage. Because when politics met timber, things got slippery. The famous London Bridge, for instance, suffered partial collapses multiple times before being rebuilt in stone. Each version added lessons: wider piers, better drainage, fewer wooden supports near the centre span. The London Bridge we romanticize today was basically a graveyard of earlier engineering mistakes. And then there were the drawbridges, the ultimate blend of defense and danger. Castles needed them to control access, but operating one could be fatal if you were standing in the wrong spot. Picture it: a guard shouting to raise the bridge as enemies approach, ropes snapping tight, the wooden platform rising like a beast's jaw. Anyone standing too close got crushed or hurled into the moat. To fix that, clever blacksmiths developed slip axles, so chains could release in emergencies, a small step toward what we'd now call a safety feature. You crouch near one of these mechanisms, the air smelling of rust and hemp rope. The iron crank is greasy, its handle worn smooth by generations of hands. Nearby, a metal pin locks the bridge in place. A simple safeguard, but vital. Without it, the heavy platform could swing open on its own. Imagine dozing guards, half asleep at dawn, jolted awake by the sound of wood smashing into the water below. Of course, some lords took things further. The bridge at Château-Gaillard in France reportedly had double counterweights, a redundancy that likely saved lives more than once. But not all castles were so generous. In poorer regions, the safety measure was a warning sign carved into stone: step lightly. That was it. A few religious orders even treated bridge maintenance as a holy duty. The bridge building brotherhoods of medieval France. Yes, that was a real thing. Constructed and maintained safe crossings as acts of charity. They weren't engineers, but they understood the divine value of not dying mid-journey. Over time, their designs inspired stronger arches and the use of limestone mortar, a subtle shift that turned crossing a river from a prayer into a possibility. There's a myth about one of these brotherhoods building a bridge so strong the devil demanded credit. They refused, so he swore to destroy it. The next morning, a single stone had fallen loose, not from hellfire, but from frost expanding in the night. Nature, not demons, was the real saboteur. And in that realization lay the next great safety lesson, designed for the elements, not against them. As you walk further, the mist thickens. You reach a newer span, still medieval by our standards, but sophisticated for its time. Stone arches rise gracefully, distributing weight along curved ribs. Beneath your feet, small drainage holes prevent water from pooling, a simple fix that stopped entire decks from rotting. Each hole was a memorial, in a sense, to someone who had drowned before it existed. It's easy to romanticize all this, but for the people crossing daily, every creek was a reminder of mortality. Imagine leading a cart filled with grain, watching the boards flex, hearing your horse snort nervously. You whisper a quick prayer, not for speed or profit, but for stability. And when you reach the other side, your heart actually beats a little faster, as if you've survived something heroic. Medieval bridge keepers understood this fear. Many installed handrails, crude beams of wood lashed to posts, to steady travelers. Others added small shelters halfway across, where people could step aside and let carts pass. The earliest versions of pedestrian lanes, born from traffic chaos centuries before anyone said the word traffic. Still, accidents continued. Horses slipped on icy planks, wagons tipped, and sometimes bridges caught fire when nearby houses burned. After one such disaster in Prague, masons began embedding iron fittings to anchor wooden decks to the stone sides. These binding plates became standard practice. You can still see their descendants on old European bridges today. Those little metal X shapes on the walls, they're ghosts of medieval caution. Not all innovation was noble, though. In some towns, bridge collapses were so common that ferrymen spread rumors to scare people back to their boats. "That bridge moans at night," they'd whisper. "It's hungry." Nothing like fear. Based marketing to keep your ferry business afloat. Literally. You stop halfway across, gazing down into the dark water. Reflections ripple around the stone arches, and for a moment the whole bridge feels alive. Breathing, settling, remembering. Somewhere in its layers lie bones, carts, perhaps the rusted remains of a long-forgotten sword. And yet, the bridge stands. It stands because every mistake carved a new lesson into its stones. Don't overload the beams. Don't forget the drainage. Don't trust the ropes in winter. Lessons learned one collapse at a time. A soft wind stirs the mist, carrying the faint clang of a hammer from the far bank. A new bridge is being built there, its scaffolding a web of rope and hope. Workers shout to each other, measuring spans, setting keystones, wiping sweat from their brows. You realize you're watching something more than construction. You're watching progress made visible. This is how the medieval world advanced, not in grand leaps, but in cautious steps across uncertain footing. From fireproof walls to fortified bridges, safety evolved the way a river carves its path, slowly, relentlessly, shaping civilization one disaster at a time. You take one last step off the bridge and feel solid ground beneath you again. Behind you, the structure groans as if sighing in relief. Ahead, the path climbs toward the castle, where new dangers wait high above the ground. You look back once more at the span you crossed, scarred, sturdy, beautiful in its defiance, and whisper a quiet thank you to every terrified builder who made it possible. You climb the path toward the castle, your boots crunching on loose gravel, and the air shifts from damp river mist to dry, cold stone. The castle looms above, its walls jagged against the dawn, its towers jutting into the clouds like arrogant fingers. From up here, the view is magnificent, until you realize just how easy it would be to fall. Castles weren't built with comfort in mind, they were monuments to survival. But survival for whom? The lords inside? Certainly. Not always the guards pacing along the battlements, half asleep on narrow ledges. Tonight, we're talking about gravity. The medieval killer that didn't discriminate. You lean over a parapet, feel the wind tug your cloak, and understand why so many safety features began as afterthoughts to avoid the same fate as that one guy who leaned too far. The earliest castles had open walls, just flat walkways with no guardrails, perfect for toppling off during a siege or a foggy patrol. When a soldier plummeted 40 feet onto jagged rocks, his comrades simply muttered, "He wasn't careful," and carried on. It wasn't until later centuries that someone finally said, "Maybe we should add a lip here." Thus, The crenellation was born, not only a defensive structure for shooting arrows through, but a blessed barrier between clumsy men and mortality. Still, these stone teeth weren't always tall enough. Imagine pacing along a slippery wall after rain, your boots slick with moss, your torch sputtering. One misstep, and you're airborne. Chroniclers rarely mention it, but castle records sometimes show quiet repairs made after accidents. They didn't mourn, they adjusted. A new parapet height, a slightly raised ledge. Evolution by attrition. As you step onto the wall walk, the breeze hums through arrow slits, producing an eerie whistle. You run your fingers along the battlement's edge. Cold, coarse, faintly damp. Below, the moat glints, dark and deep. A knight once joked that moats weren't just for defense. They also made great landing spots for inattentive guards. Sadly, not deep enough to save many. Historians still argue whether these early safety adaptations were intentional or coincidental. Some claim castle engineers designed battlements with exact defensive geometry. Others think builders just followed instinct, widening walls over time after too many slipped off the parapet incidents. Either way, human error carved its lessons into stone. But towers were worse. Narrow spiral staircases, twisted clockwise, forcing right, handed attackers to fight uphill with disadvantage. Clever military logic, but terrible for visibility. Guards descending in haste often tripped, taking others down like a row of armored dominoes. Some castles added rope handholds along walls, primitive railings that kept men upright when the steps turned slick with rain or blood. You gripped the cold stone, imagining the countless hands that once did the same. Now you reach a watchtower. It smells faintly of oil and leather. Inside, torches hiss against damp walls. A guard leans near a window slit, peering out at the countryside. His helmet rests on the floor. Safer there, he insists, since wearing it too long can make you dizzy. He's not wrong. Helmets, with their narrow visors and poor ventilation, caused just as many accidents as they prevented. Soldiers fainted, misjudged steps, or swung their heads too fast, and went toppling backward. One commander, legend says it was in Aragon, ordered all watchmen to tie short ropes from their belts to the inner wall. "If you must fall," he said, "at least hang where we can retrieve you." It's a grim image, but not far from the truth. Medieval practicality rarely bothered with dignity. You peer out the window, and the land stretches endlessly green fields, winding roads, smoke rising from distant huts. Beauty and danger intertwined. The tower creaks slightly, and you glance up at the ceiling. Wooden beams, darkened with age. Builders' new towers could collapse inward if lightning struck or wind pressure built too high. That's why some later fortifications included tiny wind holes to equalize air pressure, an accidental precursor to modern structural safety design. Then there's the murder hole, a cheerful medieval term for openings above castle gates through which defenders could pour boiling oil, stones, or worse. But it had a second, lesser-known function: ventilation. Engineers realized that smoke from the gatehouse fires escaped upward through these same holes. When under siege, the last thing you wanted was to choke on your own defense mechanisms. Accidental safety by sheer necessity. You descend the stairs again, your torch flickering over carved warnings etched into stone. One reads, "Mind thy step, lest thou meet thy maker early." Whether superstition or genuine care, it's oddly comforting. Proof that someone, centuries ago, looked out for the next poor soul to tread here. Outside, in the courtyard, labourers repair scaffolding around the main keep. It's a maze of wood, ropes and pulleys, a medieval construction site, bustling with noise. Scaffolds were infamous death traps. A single loose peg could send a mason plummeting. Eventually, builders began lashing their platforms with double ropes or anchoring them to the wall. The concept of redundancy, two supports instead of one, was born not from theory, but from screams echoing through courtyards. You pause beside a mason smoothing mortar, his hands grey and cracked. He grins through missing teeth and tells you, the safest wall is the one you finish before lunch. A joke, sure. But beneath it lies wisdom speed could kill, patience could save. The medieval world learned this again and again. Inside the keep, you find another hidden safety feature: trapdoors, designed not just for defense but for escape. Lords realized that if everything went wrong, they needed quick exits. Tunnels, chutes, secret stairs. Many of these routes doubled as air vents and drainage shafts, improving air circulation inside heavy stone walls. Accidentally eco-friendly. Long before anyone coined the term. It's almost funny. Every innovation carried a dual purpose: protect from enemies and from yourself. Even ladders evolved. Their rungs spaced closer together to prevent boots from slipping through. The medieval mind was always balancing on that knife's edge between bravery and recklessness. Then, one gust of wind cuts across the ramparts, and you flinch instinctively. The memory of all those who didn't return to the courtyard comes rushing in. The forgotten guards, the workers, the servants who slipped unnoticed. Each invisible tragedy added a stone to the next wall, a railing to the next parapet. You can almost hear their presence whispering through the corridors. Hold tighter this time. And yet, there's something profoundly human about this learning curve. The same instinct that made people light fires in straw houses also made them climb walls without railings. To reach higher, to defend better, to exist beyond fear. Safety was never about avoiding risk entirely. It was about negotiating with it. Outside again, the castle's silhouette glows golden under the setting sun. From this angle, it looks peaceful, even protective. You know better now. You know how many near deaths and broken bones built that beauty. And as you pass through the gatehouse, ducking slightly under the low arch, because some architect centuries ago misjudged average head height, you realize something: we owe our comfort not to genius, but to every clumsy, brave, and unlucky soul who fell before us. The next time you lean over a railing to admire the view, remember the tower guards. Remember the builders who tested gravity so we wouldn't have to. And then, just beyond the castle walls, the faint clang of a kitchen bell calls you toward the next danger, fire's hungrier cousin. Steam, heat, and exploding pots. You follow the sound of that bell into the heart of the castle. The kitchen. Instantly, the air changes. The warmth hits your face like a wall, thick with the smell of roasting meat, smoke, and something metallic underneath. It's both comforting and threatening, like sitting beside a sleeping dragon that just happens to cook your dinner. Welcome to the medieval kitchen, the deadliest room in any stronghold not currently under siege. The first thing you notice is the noise. Iron cauldrons clatter, spits turn with groaning gears, and servants shout over each other. Sparks jump from the hearth, landing dangerously close to bare ankles. It's a miracle anything edible emerges from this chaos. The cook, sweating, suit-streaked, commanding a small army, barely glances at you. You can tell she's the real power here. Even knights fear the cook, especially one armed with a ladle and rage. Kitchens in the Middle Ages were literal furnaces of invention and destruction. They had to feed dozens, sometimes hundreds, of people daily using open flames, crude ventilation, and cookware that could explode if you weren't careful. Explode might sound dramatic, but consider this. Many cauldrons were sealed to trap heat faster. Without modern pressure valves, steam built up until, boom, a hot iron bomb in your face. Chronicles mention servants scolded so badly they looked like melted wax. Historians still argue whether cooks understood steam pressure or simply feared it as kitchen witchcraft. What's certain is that accidents forced them to innovate. Hind lids, vent holes, and removable pot handles all came into use, Small safety tweaks born from very painful lessons. You move closer to the main hearth, where smoke billows upward through a massive hood. Earlier medieval homes lacked such chimneys entirely, filling rooms with eye-watering fumes. By the 12th century, masons began designing stone flues that guided smoke outdoors. They weren't doing it for comfort. They were trying to stop people from dying of asphyxiation while cooking. A surprising number of mystery deaths in castle accounts were likely just poor ventilation. Still, even with a chimney, fire loved to wander. Stray embers could ignite straw floors, and greasy smoke left flammable soot deposits that later caught fire inside the flue. To fix that, cooks began hanging damp herbs like rosemary and sage above the hearth, part deodorizer, part natural flame suppressor. The fragrant oils reduced smoke density, and if sparks jumped, the greenery would smolder rather than blaze. Accidentally clever aromatherapy, centuries before scented candles. In the corner, a servant scrubs a pan black with soot. His rag is just old linen, but beside him sits a pile of sand. Scoring powder. The sand helps scrub off carbon and fat, keeping cookware smoother and safer to handle. A rough pan meant uneven heating, which meant more risk of bursts or boils. Every handful of sand was an act of risk management. You notice something strange. The cooks wear cloth wrapped around their hands. Not exactly gloves, but enough to grip hot metal without burning flesh. It's crude, but effective. Somewhere between desperation and invention, they'd stumbled onto the prototype of the oven mitt. And speaking of ovens, those were their own breed of peril. Huge domed structures lined with stone, they trapped incredible heat. Once lit, temperatures soared past 500 degrees F, and without thermometers, cooks judged readiness by color. When the stones glow like sunrise, one manual advised, "It is hot enough for bread. Step too close, and that sunrise might be the last light you saw." To manage this inferno, cooks developed long, handled paddles, hooks, and tongs. Some even soaked their wooden tools in water before use, so they wouldn't catch fire mid-bake. Over time, these techniques became ritualized, little daily habits that quietly evolved into culinary safety culture. Of course, where there's heat, there's also poison. Lead, glazed pottery, beloved for its shine, leached toxins into food. Copper pots reacted with acidic stews, turning meals into metallic cocktails. After enough noble families fell ill of the belly, following banquets, regulations slowly emerged. Tin lining for copper, banned lead in drinking vessels, and the rise of pewter. Less shiny, but far less deadly. Yet even with all this danger, the kitchen was the castle's beating heart. Everyone passed through eventually, messengers warming their hands, knights sneaking midnight snacks, servants whispering gossip near the oven glow. Amid the risk there was laughter, even a sense of control. They didn't have safety manuals, but they had intuition, repetition, and superstition. You watch a cook toss salt into a pot with a muttered charm against boil and burst. Was it magic, or just a way to remember when to stir? Both, maybe. For the medieval mind, ritual was a mnemonic safety checklist. At the far wall stands a massive wooden table, darkened by centuries of chopping. Knives gleam from hooks. Heavy, single-edged, more weapon than utensil. Accidents were constant. That's why some kitchens began assigning one person as the blade keeper, responsible for sharpening, cleaning, and locking away knives after meals. The first version of an equipment safety officer, armed with authority and whetstones. One quirky tidbit you might enjoy. Early cooks wore wide, brimmed hats, not for style, but to keep sweat, and sometimes lice from dripping into the stew. A health precaution by necessity. Over time, that practice evolved into the tall chef's toque, a surviving remnant of medieval hygiene theatre. Still, no amount of hats could save you from smoke inhalation. Medieval kitchens were notorious for blackened ceilings and choking air. Some bright mind eventually thought to build separate kitchens outside the main hall, detached, with open courtyards in between. Not for luxury, but to prevent the castle itself from burning down when dinner went wrong. If you've ever admired a quaint manor with a freestanding kitchen, that's not aesthetic. It's PTSD in architectural form. You step outside into the courtyard and inhale fresh air. Behind you, the kitchen roars like a forge. Through the window, you spot a line of apprentices testing a new contraption, a rotating spit powered by a dog walking in a wheel. Yes, the medieval turn-spit dog existed, a small, energetic breed bred to trot endlessly, spinning meat above flame. Humane. Not really. Ingenious. Absolutely. It reduced the need for human proximity to the fire. An unintentional ergonomic safety improvement disguised as animal cruelty. By now, your clothes smell faintly of smoke and meat. The world outside seems quieter. You realize that every bite eaten in those days came with a side of danger. Burns, poisoning, collapse. And yet, people adapted. They learned to set pans farther from the flames, to test pots with drops of water before touching, to store flour in cool rooms to prevent dust explosions. Yes, even medieval kitchens could go boom if flour dust ignited. Historians still debate whether these safety behaviors spread organically or through guilds. The Cooks' Guilds of London and Paris both had strict training codes. Apprentices weren't allowed near the main fire for a year. Not kindness, just damage control. Experience was measured in scars avoided. You find a moment of quiet near the well where water cools in clay jugs. The stone rim is smooth from countless hands, and beside it lies a coiled rope with a small brass bucket. Cleaner, lighter, less likely to spill. Another invisible safety design. Even water retrieval could kill if a servant slipped on slick stones, so builders began carving ridged footholds into the ground. Simple, human life-saving. Night falls. The kitchen fires dim to embers. You can hear the soft hiss of cooling iron, the rustle of straw as exhausted workers rest. Tomorrow, they'll do it all again. Risk and reward, fear and flavor, repeating in perfect balance. You step away, grateful for modern ovens, for mitts, for smoke alarms that beep rather than scream. But part of you admires their courage. They didn't invent for fame. They invented to survive dinner. And as you leave the warmth behind, you catch one last glint of firelight bouncing off a polished cauldron. It's not just a reflection, it's memory. The shimmer of every burned, bruised, and brilliant cook who made sure the next meal didn't kill anyone. Ahead, the stables creak softly, hooves thudding in the dark. Your next lesson waits there, where horsepower was literal and survival depended on balance, reins, and luck. The stables smell of hay, damp earth, and warm animals. It's a dense, living scent, part comfort, part warning. You step inside, ducking beneath the low lintel, and your eyes take a moment to adjust. In the flickering lantern light, shadows move, horses shifting their weight, tails flicking, eyes glinting like polished amber. To the medieval world, this was the engine room of civilization. The horse wasn't just a companion, it was transport, muscle, weapon, and symbol of rank all at once. A castle without stables might as well be a body without legs. But for the people who worked here, the stablehands, farriers, grooms, this wasn't a place of romance. It was a place of constant danger. Imagine working beside an animal 10 times your weight, capable of crushing your ribs, with a single startled kick. Every stablehand had scars to prove their experience, hoof marks, bite bruises, split lips. They learned early to move slowly, speak softly, and never walk directly behind a horse. That simple bit of wisdom, stay out of the blind spot, was one of the earliest forms of workplace safety instruction. A groom brushes down a destrier, the great warhorse of knights. Its coat gleams, muscles rippling under the brush. But the process isn't gentle. Without regular cleaning, dirt and sweat cause sores that could turn septic. So grooms scrub hard, using stiff horsehair brushes and handfuls of crushed herbs. Lavender for scent, sage for its antibacterial bite. If a horse got sick, the knight's fortune, mobility, and pride all went with it. Behind you, a farrier works at the forge, sparks spraying. The rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil fills the air. He's shaping an iron shoe, curved perfectly to fit the hoof. The heat glows orange, the metal sings. But it's brutal work. The farrier breathes smoke, lifts iron all day, and risks blindness from stray sparks. Leather aprons and thick gloves help, but barely. The smell of burned hoof, a mix of keratin and smoke, fills the stable. It's not pleasant, but it's the smell of progress. The medieval horseshoe wasn't just protection, it was performance technology. A good shoe meant better grip on muddy roads, fewer injuries, longer campaigns. Early farriers experimented with different nail angles, learning to drive the iron into the insensitive part of the hoof. Missed the mark, and the horse went lame. A single mistake could cripple both beast and knight. Some farriers developed their own hand signals to coordinate, especially when working in noisy forges. Safety communication born centuries before written manuals. Nearby, a stable boy shovels manure into a pile. It's hot, steaming, rich with ammonia. You wrinkle your nose, but that same pile is also a secret asset. When composted, manure became a heat source. In winter, grooms would pile it around water troughs to keep them from freezing. Others used it to incubate chicks or warm seed trays. A natural heating system. Dangerous but ingenious. If it overheated, it could ignite spontaneously. Many a stable fire started from too much ambition, in a manure heap. You hear the low clatter of wooden buckets being filled. A girl hauls water from the courtyard well. She moves carefully, balancing each step. Wet floors are lethal here. Horses panic easily, slipping and thrashing in confined spaces. To prevent that, straw was constantly laid and changed, a primitive form of traction control. Medieval stable safety relied on routine: clean the muck, spread the straw, calm the beasts. The air is heavy with breath and sound. Snorts, whickers, the squeak of tack leather being oiled. Saddles hang from hooks like sleeping creatures. The leather is dark, polished by years of hands. Beside them, rows of bits and bridles gleam faintly in the lamplight. Maintenance was everything. A cracked strap could kill a rider, a weak buckle could doom a cavalry charge. That's why every stable had a tack keeper, often the most trusted servant in the castle. They were part mechanic, part craftsman, part insurance policy. On one wall, you spot a crude board with charcoal marks. Names, feeding times, hoof treatments. The stable's schedule. It's not fancy, but it's structure. In a world before spreadsheets, this was data management. Keeping track of feeding intervals prevented overworking the horses, ensured hydration, and reduced illness. In essence, it was health and safety documentation, written in dirt, but effective. A knight enters, mail jingling softly. The smell of iron and sweat trailing behind him. He runs a hand along his horse's neck. This bond isn't sentimental, it's practical. Knights often treated their mounts better than their squires, because losing a horse meant losing mobility, prestige, and sometimes life. Training took years. War horses learned to bite, kick, and trample on command. But that training also made them volatile. Only the most experienced grooms could handle them without bloodshed. You watch as a squire tightens a saddle girth too quickly. The horse flinches, ears flat. A veteran groom intervenes instantly, loosening the strap, patting the animal's neck, murmuring low words. The danger passes. You realize how much of this world runs on observation, watching, listening, feeling tension before it breaks. Safety here isn't about tools. It's about awareness, rhythm, respect. In the far corner, a stablehand tends to a small fire pit used for warming pitch. He's repairing a cracked harness, dipping leather strips in hot resin. The smoke curls upward, thick and sticky. It smells sweet at first, then bitter. The resin seals and strengthens the leather, but if overheated, it releases choking fumes. Workers learn to stir constantly and never lean too close. Trial and error forged wisdom, sometimes painfully. Even feeding horses came with hazards. Barley mash and bran were common, but if damp grain sat too long, it fermented. Grooms who fed it unknowingly created drunken horses. Agitated, unpredictable, prone to lashing out. So, before feeding, Stablehands sniffed every batch. It was both quality control and self-preservation. You notice small scratches carved into a wooden beam near the door. 4 marks, then one crossed through them. Tally marks. Probably recording days without an injury, or perhaps without a kick bucket or broken leg. Primitive, yes, but it's evidence of pride in survival. At night, stables grew quiet, but never empty. Someone always stayed behind. The nightman. His job was to watch for smoke, listen for unrest, and ensure horses didn't panic during storms. Lightning terrified animals, and a panicked herd could collapse the entire structure. Some castles installed lightning rods disguised as weather vanes centuries before Franklin's experiments. Folk wisdom met physics by accident. The nightman's tools were simple: a horn for alarm, a lantern shielded with oiled parchment, and patience. Many songs and legends about ghosts in the stable probably came from exhausted watchmen hallucinating in the lamplight. You step outside again, into the open air. The smell of hay lingers on your clothes. From here, the castle seems calmer, its fires distant, its stones sleeping. But you know now that every quiet corner hums with risk. Every ordinary job demands cunning. The stable, like the kitchen, wasn't just about care. It was about control. Humans learned to manage beasts, flames, and chaos, one careful habit at a time. And in doing so, they invented not just safety, but civilization. Somewhere above, the moon glows pale against a cloudy sky. A faint chill runs through the courtyard. Tomorrow, the castle's day will begin again, with hooves, hammering, smoke, and survival. You turn toward the chapel, where candles flicker through colored glass. There, faith meets fear, and prayer becomes its own form of protection. The chapel is quiet, too quiet. You push the heavy wooden door open, and it moans on its iron hinges, the sound echoing into the dim space beyond. A soft draft brushes past you, smelling of old wax, damp stone, and something faintly metallic, like coins or blood, or both. The air is cool here, and the light thin, filtered through small stained glass windows that glow like colored sighs. Inside, flickering candles line the nave. Some are stubs melted flat into the iron holders, others new and upright, their wax dripping like pale tears. You can almost feel the centuries of whispered prayers that have filled this room, each one like a grain of sand collecting in time's great hourglass. You move closer to the altar. Its marble top gleams faintly beneath the candlelight, but the edges are chipped, worn smooth by generations of priests and parishioners leaning close in reverence or exhaustion. In medieval life, the church wasn't only for worship. It was also refuge, hospital, shelter, and sometimes even courtroom. And each of those roles brought risk. It's easy to imagine medieval worship as peaceful, but truth be told, it could be downright dangerous. Fires started from candles left burning overnight, roof beams collapsed during storms, and crowded feast days often ended in suffocation or stampedes. The word sanctuary didn't always mean safety. That's why some chapels began to change. Over time, they learned from tragedy. Stone floors replaced wooden ones after too many church fires. Iron sconces were installed instead of hanging candelabras. And one of the first medieval safety regulations came not from a king, but from a bishop who decreed that candles near the altar must never exceed arm's length from stone. Simple but effective. You run a hand along the cold pillar nearest you. It's smooth in places, rough in others, with faint scratches that look like writing. A pilgrim's mark, perhaps. A way of saying I survived this journey. The very stones here feel alive with old rules meant to keep chaos at bay. Up in the bell tower, the wind howls. You climb the narrow staircase, each step uneven, worn by centuries of feet. The walls close around you. You can't help but think of all the monks who fell from these same stairs, carrying heavy ropes or buckets of water to extinguish candle fires. There's even a medieval chronicler who wrote that the bellman's bones were often found beside his bell. It sounds poetic until you remember. The bells weighed hundreds of pounds, and accidents were common. That's where one of the strangest medieval safety inventions appears. The bell stop. It was a thick wooden beam, or metal pin, that kept the swinging bell from moving too far. Too much momentum, and the bell could break free from its cradle. Imagine a 1-ton bronze monster tearing through the tower like an iron pendulum of doom. Some abbeys recorded whole towers collapsing from such disasters. To prevent that, carpenters built rails, safety locks, and counterweights. You could call it the first form of mechanical regulation, born not from design ambition, but sheer fear of being flattened by faith. At the top of the tower, you find the bells themselves, green with age, their surfaces carved with Latin prayers. The ropes dangle down, thick and coarse. The ringers below used to wrap their hands with cloth, or later, with strips of soft leather. Not for comfort, but survival. Rope burns were a daily hazard. One missed beat, and the bell's pull could lift a man off his feet, slam him into a beam, and toss him to the floor below. Historians still argue whether this led directly to the idea of rope gloves, those thick, rough hand wraps we now see in modern sailing and climbing. What's certain is that bell ringers often had their own training guilds, teaching newcomers where to stand, how to time the pull, and, most importantly, how not to die while summoning the faithful. You lean out a narrow window. The town below sprawls like a patchwork of smoke and rooftops. Somewhere, a blacksmith's forge glows red. A dog barks. The sound of life carries up, steady and distant. From here, you can see the crooked rooftops that made fire such a medieval nightmare. It's no wonder churches were built in stone, not just for holiness, but as the only structures unlikely to burn down. Lightning, though, that was another story. Church towers were the tallest points in medieval towns, and therefore prime lightning targets. For centuries, people assumed it was divine punishment. Priests performed rituals, sprinkled holy water on rooftops, even installed iron crosses to ward off strikes. Unfortunately, iron made perfect conductors. More than one steeple went up in flames during a summer storm. It wasn't until later that people began using grounded rods, hammered deep into the soil. Some claim these early grounding attempts were inspired by alchemical experiments. Others think it was sheer trial and error, seeing which churches didn't burn and copying their methods. Either way, medieval engineers accidentally discovered the principle of electrical discharge protection centuries before Franklin gave it a name. Back below, the chapel's interior feels smaller now, cozier. You watch a monk shuffle along the aisle, carrying a brass lantern. He moves slowly, with practiced rhythm. His sandals scuff the flagstones, and his robe whispers with each step. This monk is the sexton, keeper of the building, guardian of order. His duties include locking the doors, tending the candles, and making sure nobody dies doing either. He checks each flame, trimming wicks, replacing candles too near tapestries. Medieval churches had vast woven hangings. Beautiful, yes, but deadly when they caught fire. Many sextons kept small pails of sand under pews, a humble but vital fire precaution. That's right, long before fire extinguishers, people used sand. It smothered flames, absorbed wax, and made excellent traction on slippery floors. Near the altar, a group of villagers kneel. Their voices rise in low murmurs. the sound blending into a soft, soothing drone. You notice a child nearby, clutching a small wooden charm shaped like a cross. The edges are worn smooth, the grain darkened by sweat. That little object, simple as it is, serves both faith and fear. A talisman against illness, injury, and all the thousand small dangers of medieval life. Someone sneezes. The sound echoes sharply in the stillness. It's almost funny now, but sneezing inside a crowded church once terrified people. They believed it released evil spirits. Or worse, that plague might spread through breath itself. When the Black Death swept through Europe, some chapels banned kneeling shoulder to shoulder. Others installed narrow partitions between benches. Primitive social distancing, born from panic and prayer. You catch yourself smiling faintly at the absurdity and the familiarity. Even then, humans tried to keep each other safe, however clumsily. Behind you, a wooden confessional creaks. Its lattice screens were another quiet safety invention. Originally meant for modesty, they also protected priests and confessors from attack, because, believe it or not, confessions sometimes ended violently. Guilt can make people unpredictable. So, the screen a barrier of compassion and caution both. A drop of wax hits your hand, warm, almost affectionate. You look up at the chandeliers. Each iron ring holds dozens of candles, secured with tiny pins. Early versions often dropped burning candles onto congregants. Later blacksmiths added drip trace and metal, safety cups, to catch the wax. A small change, but one that saved lives and hair. The monk passes you again, humming softly. His song is ancient, the words nearly lost to time. The melody settles into the air like dust. You realize that safety here isn't about laws or punishments. It's about ritual. The repeated act of care until it becomes instinct. Trim the wick. Test the floor. Close the shutters. Pray not just for souls, but for stability. As you leave the chapel, the night air hits you fresh and cool. The stars blink through drifting clouds. You pause, glancing back at the tower one last time. Its silhouette looms against the moon, proud and fragile all at once. You can almost hear the bell's deep note, still hanging in the air, a heartbeat of history that rings on. Not because it's perfect, but because people learned to make it safer. And in that echo, you can hear a lesson older than any scripture. Survival is its own kind of faith. You wake, or rather drift, into another morning of medieval life. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the sound of coughing already fills the streets. A dog howls, a rooster crows, and somewhere, someone is emptying a chamber pot into the gutter below with the casual aim of a sniper. Welcome to the medieval city, where hygiene is mostly an idea, not a habit. You pull your cloak tighter. The air smells complex. A bouquet of smoke, sweat, dung, tallow, and baking bread. It's a perfume the modern nose would never survive. And yet, for people then, this was normal. Life's background scent. Until, of course, the plague hit. The Black Death, they called it. But really, it was a slow horror, creeping through ports, villages, and prayer halls like invisible fire. By the mid-14th century, it had wiped out nearly half of Europe's population. People didn't understand germs or fleas or bacteria. They thought it was punishment, bad air, or maybe just bad luck. Either way, survival demanded improvisation. And from that improvisation came some of the first real safety features in history. You turn a corner and nearly trip over a row of barrels filled with vinegar. A woman in a linen hood is soaking rags inside them. She wrings them out, then hangs them across her window frame. She's not washing, she's filtering air. The belief was that sweet or sour smells could counter miasma, the poisonous air thought to spread disease. It didn't work against germs, but it probably helped psychologically. Plus, vinegar did kill some surface bacteria. Accidental science at work. Further down the street, a group of masked men shuffle past. Their long, beaked masks make them look like walking crows in black robes. You recognize them instantly. Plague doctors. They carry staffs to keep distance from patients and little leather pouches of herbs to sniff between visits. The beak, stuffed with lavender, mint, or cloves, was basically the world's first respirator. Inside those robes, though, it's sweltering. The heavy waxed fabric sticks to skin. The mask fogs with each breath. Yet people trusted these figures, despite the irony that many plague doctors died quickly themselves. The effort mattered. The symbol of someone trying to stay safe when the world felt cursed. You pass a notice, nailed to a post. No one shall leave or enter this town on pain of death. The letters are crooked but clear. Quarantine, an idea imported from Venice, had reached even here. The logic was grimly simple: keep the sick away from the healthy. Entire towns barricaded themselves. Ships arriving in harbour had to wait 40 days before docking. 40 giorni. 40 days of silence, fear, and counting crows. Historians still argue whether these early quarantines worked or simply delayed the inevitable. But what's certain is that they introduced something entirely new: the concept of public health. People began to think of safety not just as a personal habit, but a community responsibility. That shift changed everything. You step around a pile of straw soaked in something red. Don't ask. Up ahead, a man is hammering wooden boards across a doorway. Chalk marks cover the walls. Crosses, circles, names. This house, like so many, has been sealed. Entire families locked inside, food passed through tiny holes. It sounds monstrous, but for those outside, it was mercy through cruelty. The street narrows, and you catch a glimpse of a strange contraption, a cart lined with perfumed herbs and carrying bodies wrapped in cloth. The driver wears a sprig of rosemary behind his ear, believed to protect against bad air. He doesn't speak, doesn't stop, just hums a tune older than plague itself, maybe to drown out the silence inside the shrouds. Not far away, a monk kneels beside a fountain, muttering a prayer as he scrubs his hands. You notice he uses sand and ashes instead of soap, rubbing hard until the skin shines raw. The habit of washing before prayer, originally spiritual, becomes, in times like this, a survival ritual. People start washing more, cleaning tools, even boiling linens. Slowly, the idea that clean equals safe takes root. One woman, a midwife, ties strips of cloth around her arms and face before visiting patients. The rags are soaked in wine and rosemary oil. She doesn't know about microbes, but she's inventing barrier protection centuries early. Another woman carries a pouch of dried flowers, sniffing it when someone sneezes. And across the square, someone burns juniper branches to cleans the air. The smell is sharp and comforting. You sit for a moment on a stone ledge. The town bell tolls, 3 low notes. Each strike means another soul gone. But this time, people don't gather in fear. They simply listen, nod, and get back to their work. There's something strangely steady in their movements now, like they've accepted that living carefully is the only rebellion left. From your seat, you can see the edge of the market. Once noisy and chaotic, now eerily organized. Each vendor stands behind a line scratched into the dirt, leaving space between stalls. Money isn't handed directly. Coins are dropped into vinegar-filled bowls before being picked up. It's crude, but it's sanitation. Humanity, learning on the fly. You wander toward the city gate. Guards in patchwork armor stand with halberds crossed. Their helmets are dusted with lime, believed to ward off contagion. The air outside smells fresher, almost rural. A small tented camp lies just beyond the walls. People waiting out quarantine. Some sit silently, others cook thin broth over smoky fires. Children chase chickens in slow, sleepy circles. There's a strange peace in the stillness. Even tragedy, lived long enough, becomes routine. At the camp's edge, a tattered banner flaps lazily, in the breeze a red cross on a white field. A makeshift infirmary. You duck inside. The stench hits first, herbs, sweat and death, but so does the sight of care. Women wiping brows, changing linens, murmuring soft prayers. A doctor tends to a patient using tongs to handle cloth, dropping them afterward into boiling water. Crude sterilization. But it's something. A wooden bucket nearby holds used bandages soaking in vinegar. Next to it, another bucket for clean water. It's astonishingly modern in spirit, a designated waste system centuries before hospitals formalized one. One nurse catches your eye and smiles faintly through her exhaustion. "Keep distance, friend," she says gently. You step back. The simple act of space, something we take for granted now, feels sacred here. Outside again, dusk begins to fall. Smoke from dozens of cooking fires drifts upward, painting the sky in strokes of grey and orange. Somewhere, church bells toll again, slower this time, almost tender. You notice that many doorways now have small basins of water near the threshold. Not decorative, functional. Visitors rinse their hands before entering. Some sprinkle salt around door frames. Others hang garlic or rue, herbs thought to repel death. These little superstitions, half faith, half logic, keep hope alive when knowledge can't. And perhaps the greatest safety invention of all is that hope itself. Because amid all this chaos, humans start writing rules. Town councils post ordinances banning waste dumping. Guilds demand that workers clean tools daily. Bathhouses return, cautiously, with new ventilation holes. Fear teaches order. Suffering teaches structure. As night deepens, torches flicker along the walls. A distant cough echoes like a reminder that danger never fully sleeps. But you also hear laughter, soft, wary, real. A family shares bread. A child giggles. Someone strums a lute. Life, stubborn as ever, refuses to vanish. You look back toward the city, its lights shimmering in the dusk. Somewhere inside those stone streets, safety is being reinvented, not through miracles, but through mistakes and persistence. And as you walk toward the next village, the wind carries a faint whisper of prayer and smoke behind you. An ancient reminder that every precaution, no matter how strange, begins with the same thought. Maybe this time, we'll survive. Morning breaks pale and uneven over the rooftops. The mist still clings to the low ground, curling between cottages like ghostly fingers. You step through a narrow street lined with scaffolding, where hammers echo in steady rhythm, and the smell of fresh lime mortar hangs in the air. A town rebuilding itself, always a risky affair in medieval times. You pause beneath the shadow of a new stone wall. Masons move like dancers, each with a role, each a potential victim of gravity. You watch one man balancing on a beam 3 stories high, a bucket of mortar swinging from his rope. He's not tied to anything, of course. Safety harnesses don't exist yet. One wrong step, and he's history, literally part of the foundation. But as with everything in the Middle Ages, hard lessons slowly became law. For centuries, buildings collapsed with alarming regularity. Roofs caved in under snow, towers crumbled mid-sermon. Bridges gave way beneath too many feet. Each tragedy carved another scar into memory. And from those scars came the idea that maybe, just maybe, there should be rules about how people build things. You move closer to a group of carpenters at work. Their saws rasp through planks of oak, sending curls of wood spiraling into the air. One carpenter measures a beam against his forearm, not a ruler. Precision by instinct. Still, he checks twice, because he's seen what happens when guesswork meets gravity. A foreman shouts instructions, his voice hoarse but commanding. He wears a small leather pouch at his belt, filled with chalk and string. The chalk line, simple but revolutionary, marks straight edges before cutting. It's both tool and safety measure, a way to keep walls even and stable. A crooked line could doom a family. Nearby, a stonemason lifts a chisel. The rhythmic clink of metal on stone echoes through the morning. His hands are thick, his fingertips permanently roughened. To shield his eyes from flying shards, he wears a strip of thick linen across his brow. primitive goggles, improvised from cloth soaked in oil. The oil darkens the fabric, reducing glare and catching fragments. Not perfect, but better than nothing. You think of all the invisible deaths that shaped these habits: the apprentice crushed by falling stone, the builder buried under scaffolding. Every improvement came at a price paid in splinters, bruises, and bones. You pass a house with its side open, like a doll's model. Inside, the timbers are dark with pitch. Builders learn to coat wood with resin or lime wash to slow decay and fire. The smell is sharp and sticky, clinging to your throat. But the logic is sound. Literally, a house treated this way might survive a candle fire long enough for the family to escape. Above, a mason steadies a carved gargoyle into place. It grins down with grotesque teeth, water channel carved through its mouth. Decorative, yes, but practical too. These stone beasts served as medieval gutters, redirecting rain away from fragile mortar. Without them, walls would crumble faster. Aesthetic safety engineering. Centuries before architects used the phrase. The clang of metal draws your attention to the blacksmith's corner. Here, builders forge their own nails and hinges. The blacksmith's hammer glows red in the smoke, each strike sending sparks into the morning air. He works barefoot, a habit that makes you wince. Yet his movements are cautious, deliberate. His apprentice, though, nearly burns himself grabbing a hot rod. The master scolds him sharply, gesturing toward a bucket of water. "Always test the heat," he says. The metal lies. A simple phrase, but profound. The world of medieval work was full of things that lied. Weak beams, silent rot, deceptive stone. And so people learned to listen differently. To the pitch of a hammer blow, the creak of a scaffold, the hum of tension in a rope. Safety wasn't paperwork. It was intuition honed by fear. You walk further into the construction yard. Wooden cranes creak overhead, massive tread wheels, turned by men walking inside them like hamsters. One slip of footing, one misjudged weight, and the entire mechanism could collapse. But when it worked, it was magnificent. Humans harnessing balance and counterweight to lift tons of stone skyward. There's an older worker sitting near a pile of bricks. His hair white, his back bent. He grins at you, toothless but sharp-eyed. They build higher every year, he mutters. And every year, more full. You ask him why he still works. He shrugs. Because I know where to put my feet. Some lessons never age. A group of city officials passes by, carrying scrolls. They pause to argue with the foreman. You catch fragments of their words. Foundation depth. Support ratio. Street width. These are early building regulations, crude but real. After too many fires and collapses, city councils started dictating how far houses could extend into the street, what materials could be used, even how thick the walls must be. London, Paris, Florence, all learned the hard way. Historians still argue whether these laws were truly about safety or simply about protecting rich neighborhoods from the chaos of the poor. Probably both. But even a selfish law can save lives when properly enforced. A bell rings somewhere nearby, the signal for midday rest. Workers gather under a half-finished archway, unwrapping bread and cheese from cloth bundles. You sit among them, listening to the easy chatter. One jokes that his wife calls him part of the house, because he's always covered in dust. Another tells a story about a tower that leaned so far it scared birds from landing on it. The laughter that follows is wary but genuine. As they eat, a young mason shows off a new invention, a small plumb bob tied to string, its point sharpened to mark where stone should meet stone. It's simple geometry, but revolutionary in practice. A straight wall means a stable home. You realize this tool is safety disguised as craftsmanship. Every improvement in precision reduces chaos. After lunch, the crew returns to work. The foreman checks the mortar joints with a short wooden stick. Too dry, and it crumbles; too wet, and it oozes. Finding that perfect balance is an art form. You climb to a scaffold and glance down. The ground sways faintly beneath you, the illusion of height. The wood beneath your boots groans. You grip the nearest pole instinctively. These scaffolds, lashed with rope and wedged with pegs, could and did collapse often. That's why masons began testing each section before use, bouncing lightly, listening for weakness, a primitive load test. Below, children watch their father's work, eyes wide. In a few years, they'll join them, inheriting both skill and risk. The cycle continues. But each generation adds one more habit, one more safety trick. By the 15th century, some guilds even required apprentices to learn rules of care, how to store tools properly, cover sharp blades, and keep pathways clear. Proto-safety training, written in calligraphy. As the day wanes, golden light spills across the construction site. Dust floats like glitter in the air. The newest building stands proud now, its walls smooth, its angles true. The foreman crosses his arms, squinting up at it. "It'll last," he says simply. "Long enough, anyway." You think about what that means. Nothing here was designed to be eternal, only better than before. And maybe that's the real miracle of safety, not perfection, but progress. As the workers pack up, the sounds fade into the distance. You walk through the narrow streets, tracing your fingers along the cool stone. Each block, each beam, each hidden nail carries a story of someone who learned too late what could go wrong, and someone else who refused to repeat it. By the time you reach the city gate, the sky has turned deep orange. The buildings glow softly, alive in the dying light. Somewhere behind you, another hammer strikes, echoing like a heartbeat through stone and time. It's not just a sound of labor. It's the sound of survival. Evening settles over the town, and you find yourself drifting toward the harbor. The city's restless edge, where salt meets soot. The air here smells of fish and tar, of rope soaked too many times in seawater. Lanterns bob on tall poles, their glow trembling across the waves. You pause by a wooden dock, its planks slick and uneven, and you can't help but notice almost everything here looks ready to kill you. You step carefully. A single rotten board could give way, sending you plunging into icy black water. Yet this was daily life for medieval sailors, merchants, and dockhands. The sea was freedom, wealth, and death all at once. And every port town learned to build around that contradiction. You pass a group of sailors hauling crates off a cargo ship. Their clothes are rough, patched, stiff with salt. They work fast, moving in rhythm like a tide. Heave, step, balance, drop. A rope creaks ominously overhead as a pulley lowers another load. You flinch instinctively when it jerks, but the sailors don't even look up. They've learned the hard way that flinching wastes time. Still, not everything here is pure luck and prayer. Over time, people started adding their own medieval safety features to keep the docks and the ships alive a little longer. At the far end of the pier, you spot a low stone wall, uneven but deliberate. It's not decorative, it's a breakwater. Early engineers noticed that waves striking bare timber caused rapid rot and collapse, so they built crude stone barriers to deflect the worst of the surf. No fancy blueprints, just instinct and repetition. But it worked. These barriers kept ports standing decades longer. You run your hand along the rough stone, feeling where shells have embedded themselves into the mortar. The craftsmanship is ugly, but it whispers of survival. Every scrape tells a story of storms endured. Further along, you find a watchman standing near a fire basket on an iron pole. The flames sputter in the wind, casting long shadows. "Signal fire," he explains, noticing your stare. "Keep ships from crashing into the docks at night." Before lighthouses were common, these simple beacons served as life-saving guides. A fire basket, some whale oil, and a sturdy post. That was the medieval equivalent of a navigation system. And yet, Even this crude technology saved countless lives. You imagine a ship in fog, its crew praying for any sign of shore. That flicker of light might be the difference between docking safely and splintering on rocks. Of course, the watchman adds with a smirk, sometimes they'd forget to light it. You chuckle softly. Typical. Even the best safety systems depend on humans actually using them. The sea wind grows colder as you follow the boardwalk toward the shipyards. There, you find an enormous skeleton of a vessel in progress. Dozens of men swarm around it, hammering, sawing, shouting over the roar of the wind. It's chaos, but organized chaos. A foreman calls out, "Mind the keel pit!" You glance down just in time to see a yawning trench beneath the ship's spine, filled with water and braced with logs. Workers move gingerly around it. One slip, and they'd vanish between beams. You climb a nearby ladder for a better view. The shipbuilders are using iron clamps, early medieval inventions, to hold the curved ribs in place. Before clamps, men had to hold beams by hand while others hammered, which went about as well as you'd imagine. Broken fingers were practically a rite of passage. Now, these clamps, simple U-shaped devices forged by blacksmiths, have reduced accidents by half. Not because of science, but because someone got tired of being crushed. Necessity again, doing what logic couldn't. As you watch, a craftsman sprinkles sand around the work area. It's not superstition, it's traction. Sand keeps boots from slipping on wet planks. Another small, brilliant detail carved from experience. The rhythmic hammering creates a hypnotic pulse. You can almost fall asleep to it. But then a high whistle cuts through the noise. Everyone freezes. A chain has come loose overhead. For a moment, you hear only the wind. Then the chain slaps hard against a beam and drops harmlessly into the pit below. The foreman exhales and mutters something about lucky stars. You realize that luck in this world often means someone noticed in time. You wander past a pile of ropes coiled neatly on wooden pegs. Each is tagged with a scrap of painted leather. Strong. Weak. Repair. The tags read. It's an informal system of quality control. Centuries before color coding. Sailors learned to mark ropes based on how much weight they could handle. Because using the wrong rope could sink an entire ship. Historians still argue whether this tagging system originated from the Hanseatic League's merchant guilds or earlier Norse seafarers. Either way, it's an early example of industrial safety labeling. You smile, thinking that modern warning stickers have ancient roots. Except now they're less charming and far more annoying. The evening deepens, and the harbour glows with lamplight. You find a tavern at the edge of the water, its door open to the night. Inside, the warmth hits you instantly. Smoke, aisle, roasting meat. The crowd is loud but friendly. You sit by the fire, eavesdropping on conversations between sailors. One tells a story about a ship that carried candles instead of oil lamps and caught fire mid-journey. Another mentions how some ports banned women from the docks at night, not for morality, but because they believed female presence angered the waves. A third sailor rolls his eyes. The waves don't care who you are. They care how well you tie a knot. You grin into your drink. Practical wisdom always wins eventually. Outside again, you follow the shoreline, where fishermen are repairing nets. They've learned to weave bits of metal into the edges, tiny lead weights to keep them steady in strong currents. You pick one up. It's heavier than it looks. Stops the net from flipping. A fisherman explains. Lost too many before we figured that out. The theme repeats everywhere. You look survival through failure. At the far end of the harbour stands a small stone tower, the watch post. You climb its spiral stairs, the steps worn smooth by centuries of boots. From the top, the view is breathtaking, ships rocking in the bay, fires flickering like constellations across the docks, gulls swooping low over the water. You notice something else. The tower walls are unusually thick, with narrow slits facing the sea. Defensive architecture, yes, but also early wind breaks. Builders learned that open designs crumbled faster under coastal storms, so they adapted, shaping fortifications to deflect, not just defend. The stones hum softly as the wind rushes past. You rest a hand on the parapet, feeling that strange mix of human fragility and stubborn endurance. As you descend, you spot a plaque carved near the door. It's faded, but the words are still legible. Built by those who refuse to drown. You smile at the defiance of it. Further inland, near the river mouth, another form of safety innovation took root: water wheels. On the surface, they seem harmless enough, wooden paddles turning gracefully with the current. But these machines powered mills, and mills were notoriously dangerous. Inside one, you hear the thrum of gears and the constant whoosh of grinding stones. Flour dust hangs thick in the air, almost shimmering. You rub your nose, it stings. Too much flour dust, you realize, can explode. And it did often. Millers began spacing their machinery farther apart and cutting vents into the walls. Early ventilation design, born from smouldering disaster. One miller shows you a curious contraption, a long wooden rod connected to a lever outside. Stops the wheel, he says. If it jams, pull this. It's the medieval version of an emergency shut-off switch. You're impressed, until he adds, course, it only works if you're fast enough. At least they were trying. The night grows deeper now, stars bright and sharp above the black water. You walk back toward the city, the rhythm of the waves steady against the docks. Somewhere behind you, a horn sounds, low, mournful. It's a fog warning, a safety measure as old as sound itself. Before compasses and radar, ships relied on horns, bells, and even cannon blasts to signal danger in the dark. You imagine being at sea in a storm, listening desperately for those sounds, praying they meant land and not cliffs. The sea could forgive nothing, yet it taught everything. Back on shore, you pass a wooden warehouse where merchants are sealing barrels. They pour molten wax around the lids to make them watertight. You watch the wax harden, pale and smooth. One of the men explains that after a warehouse fire decades ago, they switched from storing barrels on straw to stacking them on stone blocks. Another lesson etched in pain. Everywhere, you see echoes of adaptation. Even the tavern lanterns now hang from iron hooks instead of ropes. Ropes burned too easily. Iron didn't. You pause near a well, and there they are, a group of barefoot kids chasing a wooden hoop. Their tunics muddy, their hair tangled, their faces glowing with that universal mischief that never changes across time. But just a few feet away, the open well yawns, unguarded and dark, a perfect trap. And sure enough, one of the earliest safety features in medieval life came from exactly this kind of terror. The sound of a child falling, the splash, the silence that followed. It happened often enough that communities began building well covers. Simple wooden planks or hinged lids to stop children and animals from tumbling in. Some wealthier villages even hired someone to check them weekly, making the well watcher one of history's first recorded public safety roles. The job wasn't glamorous, but it saved countless small lives and inspired the design of later town water systems. Now imagine the average medieval home. One room, maybe two, filled with smoke, fire, and sharp tools. Babies slept near hearths because warmth was life. But that also meant danger was never more than an ember away. Parents tied their infants into cradle boxes, sturdy wooden frames with lids, to keep them from rolling into the flames. It sounds cruel, but in truth, it was brilliant. That box was both crib and fireguard, the prototype for a playpen centuries before the concept existed. As you watch a woman hanging laundry, you notice how she keeps one hand on the cradle's rope, rocking it gently from where she stands. The rope stretches from the rafters, letting her work and soothe the baby at once. A multitasking marvel born from necessity. But even that had hazards. There are records of cradles tipping, rope snapping, or rafters giving way, so eventually they tied knots or added wooden pegs to prevent the cradle from swinging too far. A subtle but life-saving tweak. And the children who were old enough to wander, they became walking test subjects for medieval trial and error. You can almost see it. Little hands exploring spinning mill wheels, chasing geese near ponds, climbing onto carts. Accidents were part of daily life, and every bruise or broken bone taught adults something new. The idea of community supervision emerged slowly but firmly. Villagers began taking turns watching groups of children, while parents worked. A forerunner of neighborhood safety systems. Historians still argue whether this was organized childcare or just a side effect of gossiping neighbors, but either way, it worked. Fewer children wandered off into forests, fewer fell into mills, and, gradually, entire villages began sharing responsibility for survival. Not all innovations were so wholesome. Some medieval toys were, frankly, death waiting to happen. Whittled wooden swords, iron, tipped arrows. Even miniature slingshots were common playthings. After enough accidental blinding incidents, parents started blunting weapon tips, leading to one of the first known toy regulations. Town markets occasionally banned the sale of play weapons of sharp end. Primitive, yes, but the idea that toys should be safe had officially entered history. And here's a curious one, the rag doll. It seems innocent enough, but those little cloth figures weren't just for play. They were safety training tools. Mothers used them to teach toddlers how to cradle infants or avoid pulling hair, helping them practice gentleness. That's right. Your modern plush bear traces back to medieval safety pedagogy. The laughter from the street grows louder. You turn and see kids splashing through puddles beside a row of cottages. One of them slips on a patch of moss, landing hard. But instead of tears, there's laughter. That's when you notice something odd. The sand layer spread across the walkway. The villagers have learned to scatter sand outside doorsteps and wells. Not for decoration, but to prevent falls. That simple, quiet act, handfuls of sand, tossed each morning, is a safety feature that spread across Europe, eventually reaching taverns, markets, and castles. And then, of course, there's the matter of animals. Chickens pecking near doorways, dogs guarding bread ovens, cows grazing freely by wells. Adorable, yes, but chaotic. Children were often kicked, bitten, or trampled. The solution? Fencing. Not the elegant garden kind, just rough wooden barriers to separate human paths from livestock pens. It's one of those invisible inventions we take for granted today, yet its roots lie in a mother's decision to hammer stakes after her child was nearly flattened by a cow. Some stories survive in whispers, like the legend of a boy in Flanders who fell into a dye vat, turning the entire batch a strange blue-green. The dyer, horrified, created new safety scaffolds to block vats with wooden planks. For the sake of the children, he wrote. Accidental invention meets heartbreak, as usual. In larger towns, safety became something of a civic virtue. When cities began enforcing fire codes, they extended the same logic to child protection, requiring window bars on upper stories and banning loose ladders near streets. You can imagine the size of every medieval carpenter tasked with installing extra beams for toddlers who couldn't stop climbing. By the 14th century, wealthier households employed nursemaids, whose responsibilities went beyond feeding or teaching. They were also early risk managers. Diaries mention locking the stair door, fastening the pan lid, or checking the cradle hinge. Little details that, in hindsight, show a growing understanding that survival wasn't just about luck. It was about preparation. You pause near a tiny garden, where an older woman tends herbs while watching two children chase butterflies. She's muttering softly, something between prayer and supervision. She's probably seen too much loss to ever let her eyes wander for long. The medieval world was small, but its dangers were vast open fires, disease, falling timber, untamed animals. And yet, amid all that, humanity learned to protect what mattered most by turning grief into prevention. One curious tidbit tucked in monastic records describes the angel mark, charm, a small cloth sewn onto children's sleeves, blessed by clergy, believed to protect them from harm. You might roll your eyes at the superstition, but consider this: the charm's true purpose was visibility. The bright patch helped parents spot children in crowds or fields. Faith disguised as safety design, genius in its own way. And those guardian angels, they evolved too. The more accidents happened, the more adults stayed close, walking kids to wells, teaching them how to handle tools safely. Slowly, a culture of vigilance replaced fatalism. People stopped saying, "It was fate," and started saying, "Next time, we'll build it stronger." As the day fades, the children gather near the well again, this time carefully skirting its edge. One boy leans over too far, and an older girl yanks him back with practiced reflex. That moment, so simple, so human, is the essence of medieval safety culture, learning through loss, surviving through shared memory. The sun dips below the hills, painting everything gold. The laughter softens, doors close one by one, and the village settles into that twilight hush where every creak of wood feels ancient. You take one last look at the well, the sand, the fences, the children disappearing indoors. None of these things are perfect. None guaranteed survival, but each represents a step, a quiet, stubborn refusal to let the same tragedy happen twice. You realize, as you walk toward the road, that maybe civilization isn't built on genius or invention alone. Maybe it's built on the memory of those who didn't make it, and on the compassion of those who changed because of it. You leave the sleeping village behind and follow a dirt road that winds into open farmland, where the smell of earth and hay clings to the air. Out here, safety isn't about crowded streets or collapsing roofs. It's about survival in the wild stretch between settlements. The medieval countryside was a place of quiet beauty and constant danger, and you'd have to be half farmer, half engineer just to stay alive. A shepherd passes you, leading a flock of sheep through a narrow wooden gate. You notice how carefully that gate is built, a double latch, heavy hinges, a top beam to keep it from sagging. It's more than just craftsmanship, it's protection. Wolves, thieves, and storms were constant threats, and that simple gate stood as the farmer's first defense. This is where rural safety features begin, not with kings or architects, but with people who refuse to lose another animal, another harvest, another night's sleep. The shepherd nods to you, then tugs the gate closed and slips a wooden peg through the latch. That peg, primitive as it looks, is an early form of fail-safe design. If the latch fails, the peg holds. It's the same logic that keeps modern safety doors from swinging open in a storm, centuries before engineers coined the term. Redundancy. Peasants were quietly inventing it by trial and error. You walk further and spot a farmer ploughing his field with an ox. Each furrow cuts deep and straight, guided by wooden beams and iron fittings. The plough looks dangerous, heavy, spiked, ready to crush a foot if mishandled. So, of course, someone in history found a way to make it safer. The plough pin loop, a tiny iron ring, kept the plough's blade from twisting loose on rough ground. It saved oxen from injury and men from crushed toes. It's hardly mentioned in chronicles, but without it, medieval agriculture would have been far more lethal. A gust of wind ripples through the crops, and you hear the creak of wood ahead, the rhythmic groan of a watermill. Mills were both a blessing and a curse. They ground grain faster than any hand stone, but they were also mechanical monsters. Early records describe millers losing fingers, arms even lives to the turning gears. That's why mill builders began enclosing their gears behind wooden guard boxes. It wasn't for aesthetics. It was to keep curious children and exhausted workers from stepping too close. You step into the mill house, the smell of flour thick in your throat, and see a sign scratched crudely into a beam. Keep fingers far. You grin. It's probably history's first workplace safety warning. Some monasteries even required such notes, carved into wood or painted onto walls, long before written law demanded them. And just like that, you've stumbled into the birth of the warning label. Historians still argue whether these mill warnings were official orders or just personal reminders, but either way, they reveal something touching. People were learning that words could prevent death, as well as record it. Outside, a farmer leads you toward a storage barn, its roof freshly thatched. You glance upward and notice a surprising detail. The roof pitch is steep, too steep for someone to walk across. That wasn't by accident. After enough farmers fell breaking ice or cleaning gutters, they realized that a sharper slope would shed debris faster and discourage climbing altogether. A passive safety feature, built not to save someone mid-fall, but to make falling impossible in the first place. There's a pile of tools beside the barn door. Scythes, pitchforks, a sickle so sharp it glints like silver in the dusk. One handle has a curious groove carved into it. The farmer explains proudly that it's for grip. Keeps the tool from flying off when my hands sweat. You run your fingers along the groove. It's crude, but clever. Another uncelebrated leap in design. You can almost picture the day someone learned that lesson the hard way, the scythe slipping, the scream, the scar that led to improvement. Farther along the path, you come upon a wooden bridge spanning a sluggish stream. It looks fragile, but notice the railings. Low, sturdy, set just right for someone walking while carrying grain sacks. The builders learned, likely from drownings or slips, that a waist, high rail-prevented top, heavy travellers from tumbling in. And that single change spread fast across Europe. Even the great stone bridges of cities like Florence and Bruges began adding railings after rural builders proved their worth. As you cross, frogs croak from the reeds, and the moon paints silver on the water. You imagine what it felt like back then, to cross a bridge with no railing, no guarantee. Every innovation you see here came from fear turned into foresight. You reach another farmstead and find a woman stirring a pot near an outdoor oven. The oven's mouth glows red, the air rippling with heat. You notice a line of small stones leading away from it. Burn marks tell the story of how many times it's caught fire before. She points to the stones and says, "That's where my husband laid the fire line." Early fire breaks, tiny but effective. The idea that you could plan for failure rather than simply pray against it was radical at the time. There's a softness to rural innovation, though a humility. Nobody thought they were changing history. They were just tired of tragedy, like the blacksmith who invented tongs with a spring hinge so his apprentice wouldn't scorch his hands, or the cooper who lined his barrels with wet clay to stop them from exploding during fermentation. Quiet genius hidden in muddy boots and colloused palms. You sit on a fence and watch a cluster of villagers erecting a new barn. The framework rises like ribs against the sky. Before the final beam goes up, one man climbs the roof and ties a small bundle of herbs to the peak. You ask why, and someone answers, to keep the wind kind. It's a superstition, yes, but also an ancient meteorological test. The herbs bend with the breeze, warning builders when storms approach. A medieval weather indicator, disguised as faith. And maybe that's the most human detail of all. Safety in these centuries wasn't just physical. It was spiritual, psychological. People needed to believe the world could be managed, that a charm, a cross, or a well-placed beam could hold chaos at bay. You see it everywhere, The iron horseshoes above doors, the wind bells by windows, the straw effigies hung near wells to scare evil spirits, but, in truth, to scare away rats. By torchlight, you wander through the farmyard one last time. Chickens roost on high perches, designed not for comfort, but to keep them safe from foxes. Grain is stored in raised huts, lifted on stone legs to block mice. Every little structure, every tool, whispers the same lesson: safety isn't luxury, it's survival disguised as practicality. You stop beside a haystack and see something unexpected. A small wooden ladder leaned carefully against it. Not left lying on the ground, not upright against the barn, balanced perfectly so it won't tip. Farmers taught one another to rest ladders at an angle, a discovery born from bruises, cracked ribs, and maybe a few near misses with angry bulls. Those shared lessons moved across Europe faster than law or literacy ever could. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. The night deepens, and you start to notice how quiet rural life becomes once the sun drops. No street lights, no bells, no distractions. Just dark and the endless whisper of survival. You look at your hands, imaginary farmers' hands now, rough and scarred, and realize how much of safety is inherited memory. You don't have to fall into a mill, burn your barn, or lose a sheep to know how to prevent it. Someone else already did, and they left behind a gate, a groove, a railing, or a rope. Maybe that's why history feels so alive at night. The land itself hums with lessons learned through pain. And yet, in all that quiet endurance, there's something deeply comforting. The people of the past didn't have modern science or steel, but they had observation, cooperation, and an unspoken pact to protect one another. A candle flickers in a farmhouse window as you pass. Inside, a child sleeps near the hearth, a cat curled protectively by its feet. The cradle rocks gently from a ceiling hook, and you can almost hear the faint creak of the rope, a heartbeat of care passed down through generations. You smile, step into the cool dark, and realize that medieval safety wasn't just about surviving the world outside. It was about making peace with it. You leave the farmland behind and head toward a faint glow on the horizon. A sprawling town encircled by stone walls, its towers pricking the night sky like the teeth of some slumbering giant. The hum of distant life greets you, blacksmiths finishing their last hammer blows, guards exchanging murmured jokes on the ramparts, merchants pulling down their shutters with wary sighs. It feels alive, yet beneath that pulse lies a deep awareness of danger. Because if the countryside was about nature's threats, medieval towns were about human ones. Fire, thieves, disease. Every wall, gate, and curfew bell here exists because someone, once upon a time, didn't make it home. You approach the city gate. It's enormous, studded with iron, guarded by a portcullis heavy enough to crush a wagon. But look closer. The gate's not just a symbol of defense. It's a system. 2 separate doors, spaced apart by a small chamber. If one breaks, the other holds. This is layered safety engineering, centuries before it had a name. Merchants called it the double piece. Historians still argue whether it was designed more for security or for infection control, since some towns used it to quarantine visitors during plague waves. Either way, it worked. As you step inside, you're struck by the smell, a mixture of bread, smoke, and humanity. The cobbled street twists between timbered houses, some leaning dangerously close together. You duck instinctively, because above you hangs a wooden bucket suspended by a rope. It's not decoration, it's one of the earliest fire prevention systems. In many towns, citizens were legally required to keep water or sand on hand in case of a blaze. Buckets dangled from windows, ready to be dropped or passed hand to hand when someone yelled, "Fire!" You can almost picture it, the night erupting into panic, bells clanging, villagers forming bucket lines as sparks rained down from thatched roofs. Those drills, chaotic as they were, saved whole districts. And from that chaos grew a remarkable concept: the watch patrol. The town watch wasn't just about catching thieves. It was about watching the night itself. Every few hours, they'd check for open flames, listen for strange noises, and even ensure taverns were dousing their hearths before closing. Imagine it. Medieval night, shift workers, trudging through rain with lanterns and pikes, muttering about curfews and drunks. It's the direct ancestor of your modern fire department and neighborhood patrol combined. You pause beside a small square, where a well sits at the center surrounded by wooden posts. A faded notice hangs from one: no refuse, no washing after dark. You chuckle. It's basically a medieval public safety sign. Wells were lifelines, but also disease traps. After too many outbreaks, towns began fencing them off, banning laundry and dumping. The idea of hygienic zoning, separating clean and dirty activities, was born right here, in chalk and oak. Historians still debate whether those rules were based on genuine understanding of contamination or just observation of patterns. But either way, it shows a spark of scientific thinking: cause, effect, prevention. You wander deeper into the town, the streets narrowing, torches flickering on every corner. The buildings here tilt inward like old friends whispering secrets. You glance up and notice something clever. Their overhanging upper floors leave just enough space for rainwater to run off safely without soaking passers-by. That's no accident. Architects learned that steep angles and carved gutters prevented falling debris and flooding accidents. Some even installed lead spouts shaped like dragons to channel water away from walls. A delightful mix of superstition and physics. A black cat darts across your path, and you find yourself before a tavern. Laughter seeps through the door, along with the faint scent of ale and smoke. You step inside, greeted by warmth, clatter, and chaos. In one corner, a group of men are playing dice. In another, a bard plucks at a lute. But what catches your eye is something tiny: a small iron hoop bolted to the wall near the fireplace. You ask the innkeeper about it, and he grins. Keeps the chairs from sliding too close to the flame, he says. Lost half a bench that way once. A humble piece of iron, but think about it. A built-in fire distance limiter, centuries before anyone coined fire code. Taverns and inns, often crowded with wary travelers, became accidental testing grounds for public safety. Rope railings on stairs, stable lantern hooks, even the first "no smoking near hay" rules, all born here, out of spilled ale and near disasters. Back outside, the night air feels cool again. You follow a cobbled lane toward a bridge leading out of town. But before crossing, you pause at an iron gate covering a storm drain. A faint trickle echoes below. These weren't just sewers, they were safety marvels in disguise. The grates kept people and animals from falling in, while also stopping trash from clogging water flow. In London Bruges and Ubeck, city records mention these grates saving hundreds of lives, especially during floods. You lean over the edge, listening to the rush of water below, and think how many of history's cleverest inventions came not from ambition, but from fear. People died, others mourned, and someone said, "Never again." And out of that came gates, grates, walls, and warnings. The wind picks up as you cross the bridge. Below, the river glimmers under the moonlight, and for a moment, the whole world feels stitched together by quiet human stubbornness. The same instinct that made someone hang a bucket, dig a ditch, or tie a rope. On the far bank, an old woman sweeps the path outside a hospice. She hums softly, the tune lost to time. These places, the medieval hospitals, were once refuges of chaos, bleeding, prayer, and desperation all in one. But even here, small safety features emerged. Herbs hung by doors to purify the airs somewhat, divided sleeping quarters for the contagious, and hand-washing basins before mealtime. They didn't yet understand microbes, but they understood patterns. People who washed survived more often than those who didn't. You enter the hospice courtyard and find a stone plaque reading, "Cleanliness is next to holiness." It's not just religious, it's pragmatic. By the late 15th century, health and safety had begun to merge with morality. Protecting others wasn't just smart, it was good. Inside, candles flicker across the faces of sleeping patients. A nurse checks one man's breathing, then carefully snuffs her candle before leaving. Her movements are measured, deliberate. No stray flame, no wasted step. It's quiet heroism, the kind history rarely records. When you step back into the street, dawn is bleeding slowly into the sky. Roosters crow, shutters creak open, and the town begins to wake. You turn to look at it all. The walls, the bridges, the fences, the careful buckets dangling from windows. Each of them was someone's answer to fear, and somehow all of them together became civilization. You take a slow breath, and the thought settles deep. Every safety feature you've seen tonight, the moats, the wells, the cradles, the guardrails, exists because people refuse to accept chaos as fate. It's the same human instinct that built seatbelts and vaccines and circuit breakers centuries later. The tools changed, but the heart didn't. And now, as the light spills across the cobbles, you realize you've walked through more than just history. You've walked through memory, through humanity's long, stumbling effort to protect itself. The air warms. The bells begin to ring. Somewhere, a mother warns her child to stay away from the well. Somewhere else, a blacksmith checks his tongs before the first spark flies. The same old lessons, carried quietly forward. And maybe that's the real beauty of medieval safety, not its invention, but its persistence. Because survival, you realize, isn't loud. It's careful. It's humble. It's the whisper that says, "Be ready next time." The sky glows gold now, and with it comes peace. You stretch, yawn, and feel the weight of centuries lift off your shoulders. It's time to rest. Let your breathing slow now. The bells in the distance fade to a low hum, like waves on a quiet shore. Picture the town you've just left. The rooftops soft with dawn mist. The streets empty but alive with invisible echoes. Somewhere, the water still trickles through its stone channels, patient and steady, as if it's been guarding the city forever. You imagine the gates closing gently, the torches going out one by one, the wooden doors sealing in warmth. Every sound becomes softer. The crackle of a dying hearth, the coo of a morning dove, the rhythmic sigh of wind against the shutters. Even the air feels older, slower, like it's exhaling after centuries of tension. Think of all the people who came before you. Farmers tying ropes, builders setting beams, mothers guarding cradles. They didn't know your name, but every single one of them built a world you could live in safely. And in a way, they're still here. Every railing, every lock, every warning label is their voice, whispering, "Be careful, stay warm, live long." The sun climbs higher, spilling light across cobblestones that shimmer like gold leaf. Somewhere, a church bell tolls once, low and kind, like a lullaby for the living. You let the sound wash through you, and the story fades, not with an ending, but with a promise that care, even in the smallest acts, always survives. Sleep well, traveller. The walls are strong tonight, the fires are out, and the world, at least for now, is safe. Sweet dreams.